The water was cold against her fingertips when Elena noticed it, the single tear rolling down the cheek of a man who hadn't moved in 7 months. Her hand froze mid-air, the washcloth dripping onto sterile white sheets. The monitors continued their monotonous beeping. The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar buzz. Everything in room 408 remained exactly as it had been for 214 days, except for that one tear, catching the harsh hospital light as it traced a path down Richard Hale's motionless face. "Mr. Hale," she whispered, her voice cracking. Nothing. Just the respirator's mechanical breath. In and out. In and out. But Elena had seen it. And in that moment, standing alone in the silence of the midnight shift, she knew with absolute certainty that the man everyone had written off as gone, the millionaire whose family stopped visiting, whose business partners stopped calling, whose name had faded from headlines into obituary drafts, was still somewhere inside that broken body, fighting to come back. What happened next would shatter everything the medical world believed about coma patients. But more than that, it would prove that sometimes the smallest acts of human kindness can pull someone back from the edge of an abyss that science cannot measure. This is that story. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. 7 months earlier, Richard Hale had everything a man could want, and nothing that actually mattered. At 43, he'd built a technology empire from nothing, transforming a garage startup into a billion-dollar corporation that employed 15,000 people across 4 continents. Forbes featured him. TED invited him. Presidents called him for advice. But his wife had left him 3 years prior, taking their daughter to a different state and a different life. His parents had died disappointed in a son who chose board meetings over Sunday dinners. His brother hadn't spoken to him in a decade after a business deal went sour. Richard Hale had conquered the world and lost his soul in the process. The accident happened on a Tuesday. A distracted driver ran a red light at the intersection of 5th and Main. Richard's Mercedes crumpled like paper. The paramedics found him unconscious, bleeding from a severe head trauma that would change everything. The surgery lasted 11 hours. The doctors saved his life but couldn't save his consciousness. Severe traumatic brain injury, they said. Vegetative state. Minimal brain activity. The prognosis was clinical and cold. He would never wake up. For the first month, his assistant visited twice a week, bringing papers that would never be signed. His ex-wife came once, stood at the foot of his bed for 7 minutes, and never returned. A few business associates showed up for appearances, their discomfort palpable as they stared at the shell of the man who'd once commanded boardrooms with a single glance. By month 3, the visits stopped entirely. Richard Hale became patient 408B, a body in a bed, a name on a chart, a problem the hospital couldn't solve and the insurance company didn't want to pay for. The nurses rotated through his care with efficient detachment. Clean him, turn him, check vitals, move on. There were patients who could actually get better, patients who deserved the emotional investment. Room 408 was just maintenance, keeping a body alive that had already said goodbye to living. Then Elena Garcia took the night shift. She was 26, with tired eyes that had seen too much, and a heart that refused to harden despite every reason to do so. She'd become a nurse for the same reason her mother had before her, because she believed that caring for people at their most vulnerable was sacred work. Her mother had died in a hospital bed when Elena was 19, stage 4 cancer, the doctors had said with the same clinical detachment she now heard in their voices when they discussed Mr. Hale. Terminal. Palliative care only. Make her comfortable. But one nurse, Elena couldn't even remember her name now, had treated her mother differently in those final weeks. had talked to her like she was still there, still listening, still mattering, had held her hand and told her stories, and played her favorite music even when the doctors said she probably couldn't hear anymore. And on the last day, when Elena's mother couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but lie there dying, that nurse had whispered, "You did good, Maria. Your daughter is going to be just fine." Elena's mother had died 30 minutes later, but she'd died knowing she wasn't alone. That nurse had given Elena a gift more valuable than any medical intervention, the understanding that humans need more than medicine. They need presence, they need dignity, they need to be seen as people, not problems. So when Elena started working the night shift at Metropolitan General and saw how the other nurses treated the patient in room 408, efficiently, professionally, and with the emotional investment of someone cleaning a car, she made a decision. She would treat Richard Hale like he was still human. It started small. While other nurses worked in silence, Elena talked. She narrated what she was doing as she did it. "I'm going to check your vitals now, Mr. Hale. Your blood pressure has been good lately. That's a positive sign." She told him about the weather. "It's raining tonight. That gentle kind of rain that makes everything smell like earth and new beginnings." She shared pieces of her day. "A patient in 302 went home today. She's been here 2 months recovering from a stroke, and she walked out on her own 2 feet. Her grandkids were waiting in the lobby with balloons," the other nurses noticed. "You know he can't hear you, right?" Sarah, a veteran nurse with 20 years' experience, said one night with barely concealed irritation, "You're wasting time and energy talking to a vegetable." Elena's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice calm. "We don't actually know what he can or can't hear. The science on coma patients is still... The science is clear. Vegetative state means vegetative state. There's nobody home." Sarah tapped the chart. "Stop getting attached. It only makes it harder when they finally pull the plug." But Elena didn't stop. She started bringing her phone to work, playing soft classical music during her rounds. Mozart, Debussy, Chopin. She'd read somewhere that music could reach parts of the brain that words couldn't. She brought newspapers and read him the headlines. "The stock market hit a new high today. Your company's stock is up 3%. I looked it up. Someone named David Chen is running things now." She read him poetry. Mary Oliver, Rumi, Pablo Neruda. Words about nature and love and the stubborn persistence of hope. And every night, during the quietest hours when the hospital felt like a ship drifting through darkness, Elena performed the most basic act of nursing care. She bathed him. Other nurses rushed through it. 5 minutes, maybe 7 if they were thorough. Wash, dry, done. Elena took her time. She warmed the water carefully, testing it against her wrist, the way her mother had taught her to test a baby's bottle. Not too hot, not too cold. Just right. She spoke gently as she worked. "I'm going to wash your face now, Mr. Hale. The water might feel a little cool." She moved with deliberate care, treating his unresponsive body with the same dignity she'd want for herself. His arms, his chest, his legs. "You have strong hands," she said one night, washing between his fingers. "I bet you built things with these hands. Not just businesses, real things. Maybe you used to work on cars, or build furniture, or garden. These are the hands of someone who made things." She talked to fill the silence, but also because she believed, despite the evidence, despite the science, despite what every logical person told her, that maybe, somewhere deep inside that damaged brain, Richard Hale could still hear. "My mother used to say that the soul doesn't leave until the very end," Elena whispered one night, washing his hair. "That even when the body seems empty, there's still something essential listening. I don't know if that's true, Mr. Hale, but I'm going to act like it is, just in case." If you're still watching up to now, type "I'm still here" in the comment section. 3 months into Elena's routine, something changed. It was a Thursday night, 2:47 a.m. according to the clock on the wall. Elena had just started the bathing process, warming the water in the small basin, adding a drop of lavender oil because she'd read that scents could stimulate brain activity. She'd had a difficult evening. A patient in the ICU had coded twice. A family had received devastating news about their father's cancer. A teenager had been brought in from a car accident, and Elena had held the mother while she sobbed in the waiting room. Elena was exhausted, emotionally depleted, running on fumes and the cold coffee she'd been nursing for 3 hours. "I'm tired tonight, Mr. Hale," she admitted softly as she wrung out the washcloth. "Some days this job makes me question everything, whether I'm making any difference at all, whether any of this matters." She pressed the warm cloth to his forehead, gentle and slow. The mother tonight, the one with the teenager in the accident. She asked me if God was punishing her, if she'd done something wrong to deserve this. Elena's voice cracked. I didn't know what to say. "What do you say to that?" She moved the cloth across his temples, down his cheeks. I told her that suffering isn't punishment, that sometimes terrible things just happen, and all we can do is hold on to each other through them. I told her that her son was fighting, and that she needed to believe. That's when she saw it. The tear. It emerged from the corner of Richard Hale's left eye, rolling down his cheek in a path that caught the fluorescent light. A single, perfect tear on a face that hadn't moved in 7 months. Elena's hand froze. The washcloth dripped water onto the bed. "Mr. Hale?" Nothing. The monitors continued their steady beeping. His chest rose and fell with the respirator's mechanical rhythm. His eyes remained closed. But that tear was real. Elena could see it glistening on his skin. Her heart hammered. "Mr. Hale, can you hear me? If you can hear me, can you do that again?" Silence. She waited, barely breathing, watching his face with an intensity that made her eyes burn. 1 minute. 2. 5. Nothing. Elena looked around the empty room, suddenly feeling foolish. It could have been anything. A biological reflex, excess fluid, the position of his head. There were 100 medical explanations that had nothing to do with consciousness or awareness, but her gut told her different. "I saw you," she whispered, leaning close. "I know you're in there, Mr. Hale. I know you're fighting." She finished the bath with trembling hands, her mind racing. Should she tell someone? Would they believe her? Sarah would laugh. The doctors would attribute it to wishful thinking or neural misfiring. Elena documented it in the chart anyway. 2:47 a.m., observed lacrimation from left eye during routine care. Patient otherwise unchanged. Clinical, professional, giving herself plausible deniability. But in her heart, she knew she'd witnessed something more. The next night, Elena came to work with a new determination. She'd spent her day off researching coma recovery, diving deep into medical journals and case studies. The statistics were grim. Less than 15% of patients in vegetative states ever regained consciousness, and most of those who did remained severely impaired. But there were exceptions. Miracles, some called them. Patients who'd woken up after months or even years, defying every medical prediction. The common thread in many of these cases was persistent stimulation. Family members who talked to them constantly. Therapists who worked with them daily. Loved ones who refused to give up. Richard Hale had none of those things. He had Elena. "Okay, Mr. Hale," she said that night, settling into the chair beside his bed. "We're going to try something different. I'm going to talk to you, really talk to you, and you're going to listen. And when you're ready, you're going to find a way to show me you're still in there." She started telling him stories. Real stories, not just mundane updates about her day. She told him about growing up in a small town in New Mexico, where her father had worked construction and her mother had been the only nurse for 30 miles. About summer nights catching fireflies with her little brother. About her first heartbreak at 16. About the day she decided to follow her mother's path into nursing. I wasn't always sure I made the right choice, Elena admitted. Nursing school was brutal. The pay is terrible. The hours are worse. Most people treat us like we're just doctor assistants or glorified maids. She paused, gathering courage. But then I remember my mother, how she found meaning in the smallest acts of care. How she said that healing wasn't just about curing disease. It was about honoring the sacred in every human being, no matter how broken they seemed. Elena reached out and took Richard's hand. It was warm, lifeless, unresponsive. "You're broken right now, Mr. Hale. I won't pretend you're not. Your brain is damaged. Your body is failing. Every logical person would say you're already gone." She squeezed his hand gently. "But I don't believe that. I think you're trapped in there, locked behind walls of trauma and injury, screaming to get out. And I'm going to help you find your way back." Over the following weeks, Elena established a routine. Every night, she'd spend an hour talking to Richard after completing her other duties. She brought books and read to him. Adventure novels, biographies, philosophy. She downloaded podcasts about business and technology, subjects she guessed might interest a man who'd built an empire. She brought photos she'd printed from online articles about his life. "This is you receiving an award from the Innovation Council. You're wearing a tuxedo, and you look uncomfortable, like you'd rather be anywhere else." She showed him pictures of his company's headquarters. "David Chen has been running things, but from what I can tell, he's made some changes you probably wouldn't like. They sold the research division you founded." And every night during the bathing ritual, Elena talked to him like he was fully present. "I'm going to wash your left arm now. You've lost muscle mass. We need to get you into physical therapy if you ever wake up. The water's a little warm tonight. Let me know if it's too hot. Let me know however you can. You have a scar on your shoulder. Old injury? Surgery? There's a story there, I bet." The other nurses thought she was crazy. "Elena, this has gone too far," Sarah confronted her one evening during shift change. "You're spending hours with a patient who will never wake up. You're neglecting your other responsibilities. You're setting yourself up for heartbreak." "I'm doing my job," Elena said quietly. "Your job is patient care, not whatever this is. This is obsession." "Maybe," Elena admitted. "But what if I'm right? What if he can hear me? What if all he needs is someone to believe in him?" Sarah's expression softened slightly. "Honey, I know you mean well, but hoping doesn't change reality. That man's brain is too damaged. Even if he did wake up, which he won't, he'd be so impaired he wouldn't even recognize his own name. You don't know that." "Actually, I do. 20 years of experience tells me that." Sarah touched Elena's shoulder. "Protect your heart. This job will break you if you care too much about the ones you can't save." But Elena couldn't stop. Wouldn't stop. Because she'd seen that tear. And because every night when she held Richard's hand and talked to him, she felt something. An intuition. A whisper. A sense that someone was listening. She started bringing objects for him to touch. A smooth river stone. A piece of velvet fabric. A pine cone from the park. "This is lavender from my garden," she said one night, holding the dried flowers near his face. "Can you smell it? They say scent is the strongest memory trigger." She played different types of music. Classical, jazz, rock and roll, country. "Which do you prefer? The classical seems to calm your heart rate. I've been watching the monitors. Maybe you were a Mozart fan." She brought her brother's guitar one night and played simple melodies, her unpracticed fingers fumbling through chords. "I'm terrible at this," she laughed. "My brother tried to teach me when we were kids, but I never practiced. Maybe when you wake up, you can give me lessons. Do you play? You look like you might have played something." She was grasping at straws, she knew, throwing everything at the wall to see what might stick. But then, on a Tuesday night, exactly 4 months after the tear, something extraordinary happened. Elena was washing Richard's hands, taking her time as always when she felt it, the slightest pressure against her palm. So subtle she almost missed it. She froze. "Mr. Hale, can you do that again?" She waited, her hand still in his. Nothing. 5 seconds. 10. 15. And then, there. A definite squeeze. Weak, barely perceptible, but real. "Oh my God," Elena breathed. "You can hear me. You really can hear me." She pressed the call button with her free hand, her heart racing. "I need Dr. Morrison in room 408. Now." Dr. Morrison arrived 8 minutes later, clearly annoyed at being pulled from his rounds for what he assumed was another false alarm. "What is it, Nurse Garcia?" He squeezed my hand. I felt it. Twice. The doctor's expression was patient but skeptical. "Reflexes can—" "It wasn't a reflex. I asked him to do it and he did. Please, just examine him." Dr. Morrison sighed, but moved to the bedside. He performed standard neurological tests, checking pupil response, reflexes, response to stimuli. "I'm not seeing anything different from his baseline exam," he said after several minutes. "Try asking him to respond," Elena urged. "Nurse Garcia, please." Dr. Morrison looked like he wanted to refuse, but something in Elena's face made him reconsider. He leaned over the bed. "Mr. Hale, if you can hear me, squeeze my hand." They waited. Nothing. "Mr. Hale, this is Dr. Morrison. If you're aware, give any sign. Move a finger. Anything. Silence. No movement." The doctor straightened. "There's no response. I understand you want to believe, but what you felt was likely a muscle spasm or your own wishful interpretation of normal biological reflexes. But I know what you think you felt, but the medical evidence doesn't support consciousness." His voice softened. "I admire your dedication to your patients, truly. But you need to accept reality. This man is not coming back." After he left, Elena stood alone in the room, doubt creeping in for the first time. Had she imagined it? Was she so desperate to believe that she'd convinced herself of something that wasn't real? She looked at Richard's still face, his closed eyes, his slack features. "Did I make it up?" she whispered. "Am I crazy?" And then, faintly, almost imperceptibly, his right index finger moved. Just a twitch, a tiny contraction. But she saw it. "You're still fighting," Elena said, tears streaming down her face. "I see you. I know you're there." She pulled up a chair and sat down, taking both his hands in hers. "Listen to me, Mr. Hale. I don't know why you can't respond for the doctors. Maybe you're too weak. Maybe it takes everything you have just to make the smallest movement. But I believe in you, and I'm not giving up." She leaned close, her voice fierce and tender. "Fight. Whatever it takes, wherever you are, fight your way back. Because you matter. Your life isn't over. There are people who need you, even if you don't know it yet. There's still so much you can do, so much you can be." Elena stayed with him for 2 hours after her shift ended, talking, encouraging, believing. And Richard Hale, trapped in the darkness of his damaged mind, heard every word. Inside the coma, Richard existed in a strange twilight world. He could hear, not clearly, not always, but in fragments that drifted through the fog like radio signals from far away. At first it had been terrifying, being aware but unable to move, unable to speak, unable to open his eyes or make anyone understand that he was still there. He'd screamed silently for weeks. Then he'd given up, letting himself drift into the darkness that seemed to want to claim him, until her voice broke through. The night nurse. Elena. He didn't know her name at first, just recognized that one voice was different from the others. Where the other nurses worked in efficient silence, treating his body like an object to be maintained, this voice talked to him like he was human. At first he'd been annoyed. He wanted silence, wanted to drift away into whatever came next. But her voice kept pulling him back. She told him stories, read him news, played music, touched him with a gentleness that made something in his chest ache with a feeling he couldn't name. The night she'd seen his tear, that hadn't been intentional. Her words about suffering had struck something deep, and the tear had come before he could stop it. He'd felt her notice, felt her excitement, and part of him had wanted to respond, to show her she was right. But the pathways between his thoughts and his body were damaged, broken, nearly impossible to navigate. Squeezing her hand had taken everything he had. He'd focused every particle of consciousness on his right hand, imagining the muscles contracting, willing the fingers to move. The effort had been enormous, like trying to move a mountain with his mind. And it had worked. Barely. For just a moment. But not enough to convince the doctor. Now, hearing her defend him, believe in him, refuse to give up, something shifted inside Richard. He'd spent his life building an empire, achieving goals, conquering markets. He'd prided himself on his strength, his determination, his refusal to accept defeat. But he'd never fought for anything that truly mattered. He'd let his wife leave, let his daughter grow up without him, let his relationships crumble while he pursued success that turned out to be hollow. But this nurse, this stranger who owed him nothing, was fighting for him with a ferocity that shamed every priority he'd ever had. If she could believe in him, maybe he could believe in himself. Richard began to fight. Every night when Elena came, he focused all his energy on responding. Sometimes it worked. A finger twitch, a change in breathing. Once, when she'd played Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, he'd managed to move his right foot. She'd noticed. She always noticed. "I saw that," she'd whispered excitedly. "You moved. I saw it. Keep going. Keep fighting." The progress was agonizingly slow. Weeks passed with minimal change. Dr. Morrison ran more tests and found slight improvements in brain activity, but remained pessimistic about meaningful recovery. "There's marginally increased neural activity in some regions," he told Elena, "but nothing that suggests conscious awareness, more likely automated healing processes." Elena didn't argue. She just kept showing up, kept talking, kept believing. She told Richard about her life in detail, her disappointing love life, her complicated relationship with her brother, her fear that she'd never have children because she'd devoted her life to caring for other people's families. "Maybe that makes me a coward," she said one night, "hiding in other people's lives instead of fully living my own." "No," Richard thought desperately. "You're the bravest person I've ever encountered." He wished he could tell her. Wished he could explain that her presence had become the only thing anchoring him to the world, the only reason he kept fighting to come back. Then came the night that changed everything. It was late April, nearly 7 months after the accident. Elena arrived for her shift to find unusual activity in room 408. Dr. Morrison was there with 2 other physicians, examining Richard with more attention than usual. "What's happening?" Elena asked. "We're seeing increased brain activity," Dr. Morrison said, his tone cautiously surprised. "Significant enough that we're ordering a full neurological workup. His EEG patterns have changed dramatically in the past 48 hours. Hope surged through Elena's chest. "Does that mean—" "It means something is happening. Whether it's meaningful recovery or just biological noise, we don't know yet. After the doctors left, Elena approached Richard's bedside. "Did you hear that? They're seeing changes. You're getting stronger." She took his hand. I told you that you were still in there." That night, during the bathing ritual, Elena talked more than usual. "I've been thinking about what happens if you wake up," she said softly. "Everyone will want to know about the medical miracle. They'll study you, interview you, make you a case study." She wrung out the washcloth, her movements gentle. "But I want you to know something, Mr. Hale. Whatever happens, whether you wake up tomorrow or never wake up at all, taking care of you has changed me." She paused, gathering courage. "I came into nursing because of my mother. But I stayed in it because I needed to believe that caring matters, that in a world obsessed with profit and efficiency and outcomes, there's still value in simply being present with someone in their pain." She washed his face, tender and slow. "You've given me that. You've reminded me why I do this work. So thank you." Inside his mind, Richard felt something break open. This woman, this beautiful soul who'd shown up night after night, expecting nothing, asking for nothing, just giving and giving and giving from a well of compassion that seemed bottomless. She was thanking him? He didn't deserve her gratitude, didn't deserve her care. But he wanted desperately to tell her that she'd saved him in ways that had nothing to do with medicine. Richard summoned every ounce of strength he possessed. He imagined his eyes opening, imagined the muscles responding, imagined breaking through the final barrier between unconsciousness and awareness. And suddenly, impossibly, his eyes opened. Elena's scream brought 3 nurses running. Richard Hale was awake. His eyes were open, clear, focused directly on Elena's stunned face. "You," she gasped. "Oh my God! Oh my God!" He tried to speak, but his throat was raw from months of intubation, his vocal cords weak from disuse. Only a rasp came out. Elena pressed the call button frantically while leaning close to him. "Don't try to talk. Don't strain yourself. Just breathe. You're awake. You're really awake." The room filled with medical staff within minutes. Dr. Morrison arrived, his skepticism transformed into shock. I've never seen." He shone a light in Richard's eyes. "Mr. Hale, can you follow my finger?" Richard's eyes tracked the movement. "Can you squeeze my hand?" Richard squeezed. The doctor's hands were shaking. This shouldn't be possible. The damage to his brain, this level of recovery is extraordinary. But Richard wasn't looking at the doctor. His eyes were locked on Elena, who stood at the edge of the crowd, tears streaming down her face. He managed to lift one hand slightly, a tiny gesture, reaching toward her. "I think he wants Nurse Garcia," one of the other nurses said. Elena pushed through to his bedside. Richard's lips moved. No sound came out at first, but he kept trying, determined. Finally, barely audible. "Heard. You..." Elena's sob was half laugh, half cry. "You heard me? The whole time?" The smallest nod. "All those nights, the stories, the music, the talking." Another nod. She took his hand in both of hers, overwhelmed. "You fought so hard to come back." Richard's eyes held hers with an intensity that transcended his physical weakness. He struggled to form words, his damaged vocal cords fighting him. "You fought for me?" The room fell silent. Even Dr. Morrison stopped his examination. "When no one else believed..." Richard's voice was barely a whisper, each word an obvious effort. "You stayed." Elena couldn't speak through her tears. "Thank you." The doctors would later call it unprecedented, a near-complete recovery from what should have been permanent vegetative state. They'd write papers about it, study his case, analyze the neurology. But they'd never fully understand what had actually happened. Richard Hale had been given the rarest of second chances, not just to live, but to learn what actually mattered. And he'd learned it from a 26-year-old nurse who made minimum wage and possessed more wealth in her heart than he'd accumulated in all his years of empire building. If this story touched your heart, hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss these powerful tales that remind us what it means to be truly human. Share this with someone who needs to remember that miracles happen when we refuse to give up on each other. The recovery was long and difficult. Richard spent 3 months in intensive rehabilitation, relearning basic functions that had atrophied during the coma. Walking, speaking clearly, coordinating his movements. Elena visited him often during her off hours, watching him progress from wheelchair to walker to independent movement. His memory had survived intact, a rarity that astounded his neurologists. He remembered everything from before the accident. And he remembered every word Elena had spoken to him during those 7 months. "The night you told me about your mother," he said during one visit, his speech much clearer now, about how that nurse treated her with dignity at the end. "That's when I understood why you were different." They were in the hospital garden, Richard in a wheelchair, though he could walk short distances now, Elena sitting on a bench beside him. "You learned from her that every life matters up until the final moment," Richard continued. "And you gave that same grace to a man who'd spent his whole life treating people like they were expendable." "That's not," Elena started to protest. "It is true," Richard interrupted gently. "I was ruthless, Elena. I built my company by stepping on people, by prioritizing profit over humanity. My wife left because I valued a merger more than our anniversary. My daughter stopped calling because I missed every recital, every game, every moment that mattered." He looked at his hands, still regaining their strength. "I deserved to be alone in that room, deserved to have no one visit, no one care." "Nobody deserves that," Elena said firmly. "Maybe not, but consequences exist." He met her eyes. "You gave me something I'd never given anyone else. Unconditional presence. You showed up for a stranger, expecting nothing in return. You treated me like I had value when I'd spent 43 years proving I didn't believe anyone had value beyond what they could produce." A leaf fell from the tree above them, landing in Elena's. "The business world taught me that worth is measured in output," Richard said quietly. "That humans are resources to be optimized, that compassion is weakness, and sentiment is inefficiency." He gestured to himself. "But lying in that bed, unable to produce anything, unable to contribute anything, completely helpless, I learned that I'd been catastrophically wrong about everything." Elena picked up the leaf, turning it in her fingers. "What changed your mind?" "You did," Richard said simply. "Every night you came, you proved that my worth as a human being had nothing to do with what I could produce. You cared for me when I was utterly useless, when I was just a burden, when there was no benefit to you at all." His voice thickened with emotion. "You taught me what it means to be human. Not human capital, not a resource, just human." 6 months after waking, Richard walked out of the rehabilitation center on his own 2 feet. He'd sold his company. David Chen and the board were shocked, but Richard was resolute. "I built this place by sacrificing everything that actually mattered," he told them. "I'm done with that life." He'd started a foundation, the Elena Garcia Foundation for Nursing Excellence, with an initial endowment of $50 million. Its mission: to support nurses who went above and beyond standard care, who treated patients as humans rather than numbers. "I'm not naming it after me," Richard had insisted when his lawyers drafted the paperwork. "But Mr. Hale, it's your money," which is meaningless compared to what she gave me. He was firm. Her name goes on it, or it doesn't happen. The foundation offered scholarships, research grants, and awards for exceptional compassionate care. Within its first year, it would change hundreds of lives. Richard had also tracked down his ex-wife and daughter. The conversations were difficult, painful, honest. "I can't undo the past," he told them. "Can't get back the years I wasted. But I'd like to try to be the father and friend I should have been." His daughter Sarah was skeptical at first. She was 19 now, in college, with years of abandonment to work through. But slowly, tentatively, they began to rebuild. Richard's brother took longer to forgive, but eventually they sat down together. Two middle-aged men finally talking about the pain that had fractured their family. And through it all, Elena remained in Richard's life, not as his nurse anymore, but as his friend. They met for coffee every few weeks, talked about life, purpose, meaning. Richard shared his struggles with rebuilding relationships. Elena talked about her own journey toward opening her heart to love instead of always deflecting into caretaking. "You changed my life," Richard told her one evening over coffee. "You changed mine too," Elena admitted. "You reminded me that what seems impossible sometimes just needs someone willing to believe." A year after Richard woke up, the foundation held its first annual gala to award grants to exceptional nurses across the country. Richard insisted Elena be the keynote speaker. She stood at the podium, terrified and honored, looking out at hundreds of nurses who'd gathered to celebrate their profession. "I'm not special," Elena began. "I'm not a miracle worker. I'm just a nurse who decided to treat a patient like he mattered, because he did." She saw Richard in the front row, tears in his eyes. "We work in a world that increasingly treats healthcare as a business and patients as numbers," Elena continued, "where efficiency is valued over empathy, where outcomes are measured only in statistics and survival rates." She paused. "But we know that healing is more than medicine. It's presence, it's dignity. It's the radical act of seeing someone's humanity when the world has declared them finished." The room was silent. Richard Hale woke up because his brain healed, but I believe he fought to come back because someone convinced him he was worth fighting for. That's what we do as nurses. We hold space for people's worth when they've forgotten it themselves. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Afterward, Richard found Elena in the crowd. "Thank you," he said simply. "For the speech, for everything, for seeing me when I was invisible, for believing when everyone else had given up, for teaching me that a life is measured not by what you accomplish, but by how you treat people when there's nothing to gain." He took her hand. "I was a millionaire who had nothing. You were a nurse making minimum wage who had everything. You saved my life. Not just physically, but in every way that matters." Elena squeezed his hand, this man who'd become one of her dearest friends. "We saved each other," she said, because that was the truth of it. Richard had taught Elena that her compassion had power beyond what she'd imagined, that the simple act of treating someone as human could literally pull them back from death. And Elena had taught Richard that worth isn't found in wealth or achievement or power, but in the quality of presence we bring to each other's suffering. Years later, when people asked about the miracle in room 408, Richard always corrected them. "The miracle wasn't that I woke up," he'd say. "The miracle was that someone cared enough to help me find my way back. The miracle was Elena." And Elena, still working as a nurse by choice, though she could have retired on the foundation salary Richard offered her, would smile and say, "The miracle is that we're all capable of this. Every single day, we have opportunities to see people's humanity when they've become invisible, to believe in them when logic says to give up, to offer presence when efficiency demands we move on." She'd pause. That's not a miracle. That's a choice. And it's available to anyone willing to make it. The story of the young nurse and the millionaire in a coma spread far beyond that hospital. It became a reminder that in our rush toward efficiency, productivity, and measurable outcomes, we risk forgetting the immeasurable power of human connection. That sometimes the smallest acts, a gentle touch, a kind word, a refusal to give up, can change everything. That worth isn't determined by what we produce, but by the simple fact that we exist, and that miracles don't require divine intervention. Sometimes, they just require one person who refuses to stop seeing another person's humanity, no matter how invisible that person has become. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the power we all possess to change someone's life through simple acts of compassion, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling us about a time someone showed up for you when you felt invisible, or when you showed up for someone else. Let's fill the comments with stories of hope and humanity, because the world needs more people like Elena, not because she was extraordinary, but because she made the ordinary choice to care when it would have been easier not to. And that choice changed everything. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that remind us what it means to be human. Stories that challenge us to see beyond the surface, to believe when logic says to doubt, to show up for each other when it matters most. Because we're all just one act of compassion away from experiencing or creating our own miracle. The question is, will you choose to see it?